shows. Available everywhere podcasts are found.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. We are in the home stretch of the show, my second to last segment. We ranked the D linemen last segment, but right now it is time for the linebackers to shine through. So let me get my trusty, dusty graphic. As you can see, and we have number 10 already, but we'll get into that. I think this linebacker ranking is very reflective of guys who are hard-nosed, want to get to the ball, good on and off the ball, very rangy, very versatile in their respective positions. So let's get right into it. As you can see, right at number 10, Mr. Nick Bolton. Now, I think that people really underestimate Nick Bolton just because of the fact that in Steve Spagnuolo's defense, the two main guys are Chris Jones and George Karlaftis. They are the guys who get all the sacks, they get all the love. They're the reason that Nick Bolton may not be as well known a name in the NFL. Last year he had no sacks, only 22 solo tackles, but that's probably reflective of Jones and Karlaftis' production up front. However, I do still think that Nick Bolton is an excellent off-ball linebacker, very rangy, plays from sideline to sideline. As we saw 2 years ago in the Super Bowl, had a huge play. I think that ultimately this might end up being too low for Nick Bolton. He's not a guy who's going to get as many stats as you would like him to, but he's a huge value in real life to the Chiefs, and he could be huge value in an IDP league as well. I think that for a person who might get second level tackles, I think that Nick Bolton is better than any at that, and so I'm glad to see him in this top 10. Moving on to the number 9 spot, we have EJ Speed of the Indianapolis Colts. Obviously a nice up-and-coming linebacker here. Very solid pairing with a guy who we'll mention later on in these rankings. But looking at the Colts defense, they have a lot of depth up front, and they are starting to build in the back as well. This could be a defense that really breaks from the mid-level defenses of the league to the top half. Obviously, Shane Steichen doing a good job in year 1 on both fronts. I think that EJ Speed last year, he had 24 solo tackles and 1 sack, only a little bit higher than Nick Bolton. But I think that now that the Colts are transitioning their defensive front, I think that EJ Speed will now come to prominence. If you look at the Indianapolis defense, they have guys like Kwity Paye and DeForest Buckner, drafted Laiatu Latu this year in the defensive front. In the back end, they have Kenny Moore and Juju Brents, so they really are building a nice system, and EJ Speed should be a huge part of that as well. Coming in at number 8, TJ Edwards of the Chicago Bears. And let me just talk about the Chicago Bears defense for a while. They are really going to be a very exciting defense over the next couple of years, not just the offense, but the defense. I really like TJ Edwards as a player. He had 64 solo tackles, 2.5 sacks last year. Very nice player, but this Chicago Bears defense right now is reflective of how high these players are ranked. I think that ultimately, when you look at the Chicago Bears, you don't think of them right now as a defensive team, but they have exciting depth in the backfield with Quan Brisker and Tyreek Stevenson, and moving up to the front. I really like the Chicago Bears defense, and I think that TJ Edwards is going to be a nice asset in IDP league for anyone. Coming in at number 7, we have a guy who's very experienced, one of the most experienced players on this list, in Lavonte David. I think Lavonte David's ranking is reflective of the fact that he might be the new leader of this Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. They're molding older players in the front with more younger players in the back. You're mixing in guys like Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Yaya Diaby in your front, the big guy Vita Vea. But you obviously are losing a guy in Shaquille Barrett to the Miami Dolphins, who was your older leader up front, and now that becomes a guy like Lavonte David, who last year had 48 solo tackles and 5.5 sacks. So look for Lavonte David to be the heartbeat of this Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, incorporating and implementing all these different players that the Bucs have, they should be a very exciting defense to watch if Levante David can step up and take over the mantle of Shaquille Barrett. Coming in at number 6 on this list, a guy who can be seen as higher or lower. I think that this could be a little bit low for someone like Fred Warner, but ultimately I think that because he's in such a high-profile defense as the 49ers, this is why he is much lower than people think he should be. I think he is too low as well. He has 59 solo tackles and 2.5 sacks last year. Obviously, his stats might be lower than people would want in a defense that's high profile as San Francisco's, but it just goes to show the depth that San Francisco has in their defensive line. That's all that can really be said about why a guy like Fred Warner is this low, but Fred Warner is probably one of, if not the best linebackers in the league right now. Coming in at number 5, another guy who I really love in another defense that is one of the best in the league, Roquan Smith, kind of like the roamer in this in the middle of this Baltimore Ravens defense that is so vaunted. Obviously, they lose their defensive coordinator in Mike McDonald. However, I think that Roquan Smith, he had 84 solo tackles last year, only 1.5 sacks, is going to be another leader of this team. Obviously, you have Justin Madubuike in your D front, and you lose Geno Stone in your backfield, but you have a guy like Marlon Humphrey back there, and Arthur Millett's a young up-and-comer. But Roquan Smith has just been doing it for so many years, whether as a Bear, now as a Raven. I just think that Roquan Smith is such a vaunted player, representative of what the Baltimore Ravens defense wants to be, and I think that he's well deserving of a top 5 spot. Moving into more of the top 4, we have Zaire Franklin, both him and Speed from the Indianapolis Colts coming in. I think the reason why we are seeing these guys in this list is not just because of their own abilities, but because of the fact that the Colts defense is kind of going to become a bit younger as the years go on, and I think that you need that linebacking group in the middle of that defense to be the heart and soul, and I think that Zaire Franklin, EJ Speed will become that for them. And also, they lost a guy who moved on, and we're going to talk about sooner rather than later. I think that they're going to become the new faces of the Indianapolis Colts. Zaire Franklin's stats, 72 solo tackles, 1.5 sacks. I just think that ultimately the guy they lost, who I'm going to mention, was a huge star for them, and now these two need to pick up the pace for this young transitioning defense. Coming in at number 3, the guy who I've been kind of centering everything around, Bobby Okereke. Last year, moved to the Giants, had a good season for them, 92 solo tackles, 2.5 sacks. But I think that Bobby Okereke is going to be a high-profile player in a Giants defense that really is going to progress this season with all these pieces that they've added, like Brian Burns. Obviously, they also built to the draft, getting Kayvon Thibodeau, and Dexter Lawrence, who has been there for a couple of years. I really am very high on the Giants defense and very high on Bobby Okereke as well, a guy who can get you a lot of tackles, a guy who is very rangy. So look for Bobby Okereke to have very nice stats in an IDP league. Coming in at number 2 overall is a guy who I really like in a defense that I really don't necessarily like that much, Foye Oluokun. At number 2 overall, he had 74 solo tackles and 4.5 sacks last year. I think that this is a guy who I think that in the Jaguars defense that really doesn't have that much depth to it, especially in their front 7. I think that Foye Oluokun, it has to be the guy in this defense. Obviously, they signed Eric Armstead to fill out their defensive front, but they really don't have that much depth in their defensive front, like I said before, with Josh Allen in the D lineman rankings. However, I think that Foye Oluokun is adapting to that role in spades. I think that the Jaguars defense will progress under him, and I'm really excited to see him have another huge year. But coming in at number 1, a guy who I think will deserve this by years and might not deserve it now, but Ernest Jones IV, a guy who might be seen as the new face of the Rams defense now that big man Aaron Donald is gone. That is the huge question concerning the Rams defense. Who will step up to replace Aaron Donald as the face of the Rams defense? Obviously, you have young guys who broke out last year, like Kobe Turner and Byron Young. You drafted Jared Verse. You're wanting to get younger on your front. You want to find the next Aaron Donald. But the truth is, you just can't. Aaron Donald was just so excellent for the Rams for many years. However, I think that Ernest Jones at the second level, obviously, he had 111 solo tackles and 2.5 sacks. Really nice year last year for him. But ultimately, Ernest Jones is going to be the heartbeat and soul of the Rams defense to years to come, just because he is in the middle level of that defense. But that is just about going to do it for these linebacker rankings. Coming up for the last segment of the show, kind of a weird segment where I talk about a finals preview that was kind of ruined by the Timberwolves. We'll get into that when we get back from the break.